Welcome to another episode of the Anxiety RX podcast. I am your host, Dr. Russell Kennedy, a medical doctor and clinical neuroscientist who suffered from anxiety for many, many years. I have my friend and colleague with me today, Ian Abbott, who started out as an RMT and then moved into relationship training, relationship coaching, and then now is finishing his somatic experiencing training. So welcome, Ian.
Thanks, Russ.
So Ian does this parenting class for dads specifically because Ian is a single dad of two little girls. And I think it's brilliant. I think it just, because we're supposed to know how to parent, right? It's just supposed to just come to us.
Yeah.
And it doesn't.
No.
So what do you find the biggest obstacle is dealing with men and parenting?
Well, I mean, for starters, I'm always really proud of the guys that show up. I think it's really, I mean, you could talk to this as well, but like for a guy to admit that they don't know something,
Yes,
can be such a such a hurdle,
or for sure,
or that we could do something better. It's like reading, asking for directions. So I think for the guys that come through the door, that's the first step, and just even getting some perspective on what it means to parent, right? Like, the analogy I often use is, both my daughters play basketball, and I've never played basketball. So if I was asked to coach my kids' basketball team, then I would want to read the rules, rules of basketball, for sure. Right? Because otherwise I'm shooting in the dark.
Right. Yeah.
So not that there's necessarily rules of parenting, but there are some overarching kind of like, you want to think about this or be aware of this. And because, parenting has been this thing that we've sort of inherited, for better or worse.
Yeah.
I think it's worth just pausing and being intentional about making sure we're not missing something.
Yeah, I do think we parent the way we were parented. I think that's just, and if you are in a society that's doing well and that kind of stuff, I think that works okay.
Yeah.
But as society kind of unravels, and the parents, this is what I see because I deal with anxiety, as you know. So I have a lot of parents that will say, can you see my 14-year-old son or my 13-year-old daughter or whatever? It's like, well, I'll see you first. Because chances are they are reading off your anxiety. And if we can sort of help you deal with your anxiety, they won't feel so needy to try and help you, for one, and then also emulate you as well. Because, there is this thing that we have with our parents is we just automatically emulate them. And it's part of our DNA. It's part of the way we're wired.
Yeah.
So what would you say, I'm curious, do men come to see you because their wives say, hey, you got to do something? Or do they realize that there's something wrong and they come in? Like, how do they find you?
Yeah, so probably both.
Yeah.
Like I've had some guys that get a sharp elbow from their partner to say, hey, maybe you want to look at this. And if they're, and I think the other part of it is guys, and this is where I got to when I started really doing a deep dive into this, was getting to a place where you're tired of how you're showing up as a dad, right? Like, not showing up the way you want to,
right?
Because if you're losing your temper or you're not knowing how to be with your kid when they're having a big experience of feelings because nobody was there with you in that experience, right? This idea of emotional containment, where we are supposed to be the containers to make that a safe experience,
right?
And then going back to what you were saying before, this idea of modeling and the idea that we are, as parents, we're sort of lending our kids our nervous system, right?
True.
So it's kind of like, what are you lending, right?
That's a good question.
Because if the nervous system you're lending is already dysregulated,
right,
then you can't be surprised when they end up dysregulated.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of parents out there that's like, I'm doing everything right. Like I'm doing all this, like read the books and all that kind of stuff, but it's an energetic thing. Like they feel your energy.
Yeah.
And they also feel the energy between the parents too. Because I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday and he was saying that his kids are really having a hard time. It's like, well, you and your partner aren't really doing that well. So why do you expect the kids? Well, we give them everything and they're in sports and they're doing all this stuff. And it's like, no, they can feel it. They can feel the reaction between the two. So I wanted to ask you, do you have a parenting story that's like a turn point where you're like, I got to do something about this? Or is it more just like a calling that you've had?
Well, I think it was like, even before I had kids, I knew that I would say to friends, I want to have kids, but I don't want to parent like my parents.
Yeah.
And not that my parents
a lot of us have said that.
Yeah, and not that my parents aren't wonderful people,
Right.
but there was things that didn't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that. So that's why I had that real intention. But it's much like when you go skiing and someone says, don't aim for the trees, unless you have a clear vision of what you want to be aiming at. So when I found the work of my friend, Dr. Allison Reese, I had this massive sense of relief of like, oh, that's what the other version, the healthy version can be. Right. And so that was such a relief. And then I dove deep into her work and co-facilitated with her for a few years. And then I wanted to do something that was more specific to dads, because I think there's this notion, you look at the dynamics of most sitcoms or shows like Family Guy or The Simpsons, where the dad's kind of
a buffoon,
and he doesn't really know what's going on. And so the women partners typically are the ones doing the emotional.
Right.
And so they're sort of parenting everyone, including their partner.
Right.
Which isn't super sexy.
Yeah. No, I'm sure it does affect the sort of physical connection between if she feels like she has to mother us. Because, I think a lot of times, like, boys weren't parented that well. I think it's one of those things where, we're supposed to be these sort of self-described leaders in our community or whatever, from boy. We're supposed to be independent. We're supposed to do this. So we don't really get a whole lot of, and especially if the parents are, stressed themselves. Because I know for me, I was pretty much given free rein. I didn't go too far off, I didn't go too far outside of, I didn't get into some like legal trouble or any of that sort of stuff too. And in a way, I kind of, guarded myself because I knew that there was no guardrails there. Mm-hmm. So I kind of had to do this for myself. And I think that shows up in my parenting with Leanna. I only have one daughter. And I kind of let her do her own thing. The number of times that I've had a stern talk with Leandra has been very minimal. Now she's grown into a brilliant young woman for sure. But it's funny how, I just didn't get much guidance, I think, and I think maybe we're more like, and this is something I think of, are we more likely to guide girls and let boys do their own thing, or what? What do you think? I mean, I think there's the phrase that I've coined is the idea of young boys receiving what I call an emotional space, where they, sounds comfortable. Yikes. But I think we just don't tend to speak to young boys with the same amount of feeling words that we do to young girls. Yeah. And I think that's to our detriment, because then that inner landscape of emotions is so unfamiliar to boys, and then it kind of explodes out as picking a fight. And then, they talk about how, boys get things out because they just hit their friend and then they get over it. It's like, well, do we have to keep doing that? Mm-hmm. Is that the best way to do it? Yeah. Or could we actually learn? Because I know for myself, as I've learned more about my inner landscape feelings and how it shows up in the body, which SE teaches us so well, it's just been such a different experience of being able to stay regulated. And regulated doesn't mean suppressing feelings. It means understanding them. Yeah, allowing them to be there and just seeing what the message is without, like, I have this little thing I call sensation without explanation, right? So we just allow it to be there, because there is this goal-directed thing in a lot of men, is that, okay, well, I've got to figure out what this emotion is. And just by trying to figure out what it is, you lose it. Yeah. Like, as soon as you move into the conscious realm, you lose that unconscious feeling. And I think for some men, it works as a coping strategy, is that, we don't want to feel it. So if we can explain it, and maybe that's where mansplaining comes from, I don't know. It's that if we can explain it, we don't have to feel it. And I think that's part of it. Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely an intellectualization of it, for sure. So what's your goal with your guys? Like, what is, like, when you start with them, what do you tell them? And, what do they expect to get from, is it 6 weeks or 8 weeks? How long? It's 8 weeks. 8 weeks, yeah. Yeah. So what I do is I actually send out a questionnaire preemptively. Things like, where do you feel like you're doing well with your parenting? Where do you feel challenged? What was your experience of being parented like? And that usually brings up a lot of stuff for guys. They tend to be quite revelatory in what they share, which is, I think, is valuable. Which is great. Yeah. It offers you some perspective of, like, oh, well, if that's your experience of parenting, it makes sense you do that. Right. And so to be able to bring that into the equation and not have shame about it, but just be able to say, well, it makes sense given that's your experience. Right. And they're not likely to get that anywhere else.
No,
right?
and then even just like I always do this in the first day of the course is like, how weird is this that we're a bunch of guys sitting in a room talking about our feelings, right? Because it's not what our culture does.
No, for sure.
I mean, the rise of men's groups over the years
Sure.
has been really positive,
Yep.
and I advocate for any guys out there, if you don't have a men's group, find one because
Mm,
they will change your life for the better.
I agree.
And I think the twist on what I'm doing is our focus is on what it means to be a dad,
Mm-hmm.
right? And one of the things I say to my guys in the group is that if somebody is sharing something about their experience of being a father that might be challenging and you can relate, raise your hand.
Right.
Because as soon as a few hands go up, you
Mm,
don't feel like a weirdo or a monster or whatever the
right.
belief system you have about yourself is.
Yeah. How many of you have punched a wall? You know, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's just so much we're just left in the dark.
Yeah.
And, you know, parenting traditionally has kind of been sort of the mother's task
Yeah.
kind of thing. Like the man goes out and works and the woman sort of raises the children. I was talking about this the other day because there's some studies out that show that kids raised by single dads do phenomenally better than kids raised by single moms.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Did they say
Yeah.
why?
I think they inferred that dads are much more likely to challenge their kids within a framework.
Mm-hmm.
So moms are nurturing
Mhm.
typically,
Mhm.
and dads are kind of challenging.
Mhm.
So, you know, so you learn, so you get challenged. If it doesn't work out well, you go to mom. Mom's kind of everything's okay. You know,
Mhm.
so you learn that you can stretch your nervous system outside a certain realm of comfort and then get nurtured from
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Whereas, so just one parent alone, it's hard for one parent to provide nurturing and challenge at the same time, right?
Mhm.
But I think, and I'm putting words in their mouth, but I think dads do that. I
Mhm.
think dads provide nurturing and challenge, whereas moms are much more likely to lean on the nurturing part without challenging
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like if you see a bunch of kids at a playground, it's the dads that go, we can go a little higher. You know, it's like, yeah, I can't do it. And then they do it and then they laugh. It's like, yeah, I did it. Right. And moms are less likely, from what I observe, to kind of put their kids into a challenging place. They're more designed to kind of nurture them.
Mhm.
Right. Which, and I think what happens is that we create these things, especially like the worst outcomes were boys that were raised by single moms. Right.
Yeah.
Because it's like they don't get that challenge. They get a lot of nurturing, they get a lot of, you know, feeling associated with it, but they don't get the challenge. And I think that's a lot of, you know, being able to challenge your kids without, you know, the your prototypical colonel in the army in the United States, like shoving a kid into a, you know, a shed and locking them there for 6 hours, like you're gonna learn how to be a man, you know, that kind of stuff. So it's like, where's the line between challenge,
Mhm.
you know, putting them over a point where they feel their nervous system, you know, is going to get challenged, or it's too much. And some kids are more sensitive than others.
Well, yeah. So I think you're right there, but there's two things I want to bring up around that, both to do with. Have you heard of Pete Walker?
Mhm.
Right. So Pete Walker said often in single mothers raising sons, they at a certain age of the boy, they'll start to withhold affection because they don't want their boy to be too soft,
Mm.
which to me was just heartbreaking.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Because it's like, well, okay, that's super confusing.
For sure.
But the other thing that Pete Walker said was that in a heteronormative parenting dynamic, the mother is in charge of teaching self-nurturing and the father is in charge of teaching self-protection.
Mm.
And I think that fits perfectly with what I'm trying to do with my course, is
Right.
because if you, like, to me, the ultimate self-protection is knowing yourself, knowing how to advocate for your
Right.
needs, and knowing how to communicate that effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. Building like resilience and what we talk about in SE, resilience and capacity in the nervous system. So
Yeah.
that you learn that you can handle things, that it's uncomfortable
Mhm.
for sure, you know, rather than your first breakup at 16 being devastating, you know, getting a little, dipping your toe in the water, you
Mhm.
know, like not getting access to the team, not getting picked for the team,
Mhm.
you know, at high school or whatever, you know, those traumas, when you resolve them, it's like, yeah, you know, I didn't like that feeling, but I made it through. But if you don't get those
Mhm.
traumas, and you know, in this era of the participation medal,
Yeah.
like the kids don't get challenged so much anymore, and they just don't learn that their nervous system is a lot stronger than what they give themselves credit for. And I think in a way, it's our parents' job is to kind of, you know, give them that challenge and show them that, yeah, you know, you didn't like it, but you did it.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think just to speak to that, like I had an experience with my younger daughter on Monday. where she had a play date with a friend.
How old is she?
She's 9.
Okay.
Did a play date with a friend. We were gonna leave. They asked if we wanted to stay for dinner. I said, well, we can't because we have dinner at home. And it turned out, which I'd forgotten, but my daughter sees a math tutor every week. My daughter is very upset.
Yes.
She's not happy. She doesn't want to do tutoring. And then I just said to her, I said, I hear that you don't want to do that. And this is happening.
Yeah.
And we'll just talk to the tutor first. And I got on the Zoom call first. And I just said, hey, we're having a tough day. So can you just kind of warm her up slowly? She says her brain needs to warm up. When she came out of her room and she'd done an hour of tutoring and she had a smile on her face, I said, I'm so proud of you for taking on something you didn't want to take on. Right. So that speaks to what you're saying is like, learning to be, to learn what's on the other side of discomfort, I think is such an essential life skill. I mean, if you hadn't had that skill, you probably wouldn't have gone to medical school.
No, it's true. Yeah, it's true. Or you'd quit.
Yeah.
Because there was episodes in medical school that probably 4 points in medical school in the first 2 years. After the first 2 years, I was fine. But there was 4 serious points in the first 2 years that it was like, I can't do this. There's just no way.
For sure.
And it's like, well, just, go in and talk to the dean tomorrow and then see how it goes. It's like, okay. And then tomorrow would come along and I'd be like, still don't like this. But it is one of those things that it's one of the greatest triumphs of my life is to move 4,000 kilometers away, do this program, and want to quit so badly, and then just not do it. Just not allow myself to do it. Now, the downside of that is that medicine crushed me and made my anxiety way worse. But I think I had to go through that. I think that was just part of my dharma, was to go through that so that I could tell other people, okay, this is what happens when your nervous system gets over and you push it, because I pushed it in med school way too far. And it never really came back until the last 5 years. And I started using some of the techniques that I sort of trained myself and I train others to do. It's that, it's like, I still, when I think about those years in medical school and just how painful it was, and just the self-doubt, like I'm not going to get through this. Because, growing up, I never got challenged. My parents had their own shit to deal with, and they never really challenged me or showed me that challenge is okay. So I had no resilience and no capacity. And then I go into this, very challenging situation. So I'm not surprised I had a bit of a collapse.
Yeah. But I think that the difference too that we're looking to, the tweak we're trying to make here, is that we want to challenge our kids, but it's not the old, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and ignore your feelings.
I'll give you something to cry about.
Yeah. It's like, I hear that you feel that way,
right? And
I'm here to validate that experience, and I believe you can still do it. Right. And this isn't to teach kids to push themselves past what their body's telling them, but to sort of come up against the edge of it and not freak out and get more comfortable as you do.
And what's the feedback from the guys that you get, as they go through, when they start and then the middle and then the end, what's the transition they go through?
It's super fun to see the light bulbs go on.
I'll bet.
It's super fun to see them just get more familiar with that idea of oh, right. Okay. So feelings are okay. And now I'm more curious about my kids' experience of feelings than I am judgmental. Right. I mean, this is the 6th time I've taught the course. I've had 2 guys come all 6 times.
Okay.
And and they would,
just don't get it.
Well, there's that. And they would joke that they're not the quickest study.
For sure.
But I think at the same point, it's learning a new language.
Oh, for sure.
And you wouldn't show up at a 8-week Spanish class and then expect to be fluent.
Exactly.
So if you understand that there's a degree of immersion that needs to happen, and there's a value to the camaraderie, and I think the changes that I've made over the years in teaching the course have gone from providing a ton of information to providing less information and more conversation.
Yeah, I think that's true with my courses too, as far as anxiety goes, because initially, because I'm a bit of a nerd, I talk about the bed nucleus of the striatum terminalis and the amygdala and the ACC and stuff. And it's people, there's some people that love that. They love that. And I think people with anxiety love hearing oh, it's not me, it's my brain that's doing this to me. And it's but I agree with you. It's you can present too much information. And I think that was part of my own insecurity too. It's just presenting, because I'm trying to, I'll show you that I know about, the medial lateral prefrontal cortex. I'll show you about that. There is no medial lateral, by the way. Medial and lateral are separate, but that's why it was that was the joke. But anyway, but yeah, I think there is that tendency, and especially in our world today, it's so much information driven, and especially for men. And I think we do kind of gravitate towards information rather than feeling.
Well, I was just going to say, as a bypass, right?
Right. Sure.
So I think this is where, and I'm happy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What I've learned from my somatic experience training is just slowing it down. Right.
Yeah.
And just being with what's happening in the moment versus always trying to think my way out of the issue. Right.
And I think that's a child's response in a way. I think it leans more with the men, because we do tend to be sort of more left brain linear than females do. And I think we get some sense of order in our cognitive thinking. And I think that's why, the classical thing is that, a woman comes up and then the man tries to fix it. Right. Because that's our left brain kind of analytical. Well, then you just do this. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it's like often the women just like, no, I want the emotional component. I want you to feel like, rather than immediately jumping into fixing. And I think that's true with, with my courses and your courses too, is like, okay, can we just slow down the emotion of this so that we don't skip by it. And also we get this traction, this sense, okay, oh, I know what this feeling is. Like I talk about alarm in the body with anxiety. Like, I know what this feeling is when my kid is like yelling at me and I'm saying, we've got 10 minutes to get there, get your damn boots on, and it's like, how do I reconcile that? And I think men are much quicker to move to aggression than women. Women are, I think, more go to frustration. Now that's a global generalization across the board, but frustration and parenting for men must be huge.
Yeah, because I think the safest feeling for us to express is anger.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Frustration is part of that. But I think the other part, whether it's fixing your partner's issues or your kids' problems, is that I don't think it's so much that guys are trying to fix the problem. I think it's that it brings up uncomfortable emotions in themselves that they're trying to get rid of.
Right.
And the quickest way to get rid of them is to fix the problem.
Right.
So if we just back up a step and we go like, what is, like if we don't have that familiarity with our own emotions,
right,
and our own feeling states, then the first thing we want to do is get away from that. And that's solved easily by fixing someone else.
Right.
So if we can actually pause and go like, and this is the change that I've made and a lot of the guys in my course have made, is that like, now when my kid has a big feeling, I can just go, oh, wow, like, what is that like for you? I can show up with curiosity because I'm staying in ventral, to use the SE term, right? Ventral vagal. And then I can stay with curiosity so that I can really be present with it.
Right.
Versus like, I'm in fight or flight.
Right.
I'm in, triage mode. Right.
Yeah. There's something about curiosity that takes us out of the emotional brain. It's like a degree of separation. So the curiosity allows us to sort of move more into our rational brain and out of the emotional brain, and kind of empathy can come in at that point. Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't. Some men are much better at empathy than others. But that's the opening there, that empathy can be, this isn't my fault.
Yeah.
Right. It's not my fault that this is happening.
Yep.
I can be curious about this. It's not my necessarily responsibility to fix this at this point. But can I stay in this sense so that when I get into this similar sense in the future, it's like, oh, I've been here before. I can slow things down. It doesn't have to be done instantly. And then you start gaining this resilience and capacity in the nervous system so that you have so much more patience to deal with it when it happens again, because it's going to happen again. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
I think that's the other part that I try and focus on too, is the idea that parents practice.
Right.
That we
don't look at that so much. Yeah.
No. And if we can consider that we are trying to evolve this practice instead of perfect.
Right. Yeah, I think there is this sort of template that we have, both from, TV. I mean, I guess TV isn't such a thing anymore, but, Netflix online stuff, what parenting is supposed to look like. And I think that if you didn't have that parenting, if you didn't have the mistakes, the messiness of parenting, the things that got fixed, you get this idea that parenting is like it is in the movies, either like it's a complete shit show or it's like, Ward and Beaver Cleaver kind of stuff. So like I always said, because I didn't really grow up with a dad, because my dad was kind of incapacitated, I have this kind of James Bond idea of like what a man is supposed to be, right? So it's just you kind of form around that, but in that it becomes this rigid place, and you don't really move outside of it. And unless you stay with that sensation and allow the sensation to be there, especially if that sensation is uncomfortable, you don't grow. You just stay in that same groove, and it's so hard to get out of. And because we're not there with the kids a lot, we have them for the, when they're really young. If we get home from work and there's like the hour and a half before they eat, they go to bed, there is this very small window to experience those things.
And then it's almost like you're in the honeymoon phase where you're
right.
It's like a long distance relationship where you don't want to mess it up because you've only got an hour with them. You don't want to have the challenging conversation or whatever it is to spoil the mood.
Yeah. And I think that's what happened with me with Leandra, because her mother and I split when she was 5, I guess. And I would have her every weekend, so it was just, we'd make movies, we'd go swimming. The big thing with Leandra and I was both of us like to sleep in. So we love McDonald's pancakes, and you have to get there before 10:30. So it's, we get up at 10:12. And it's like, it's a mad rush to get to McDonald's for the pancakes. Now, 99 times out of 100, we made it, and it was fun. But it was just that kind of, Leandra and I never really had to be at odds about anything. Her mother was a very, take charge. Her mother was 10 years older than me, and a really take charge parent. So I didn't really have to be, because I wasn't a great, I was a kid too, in many respects. And I'm sure you're going to see that with your guys too, that many of them are still kids themselves.
Well, I think that's the other kind of humbling part of really putting yourself under the microscope. I remember reading a book by Dr. Lindsay Gibson called The Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. And even just the term emotionally immature parents really struck a chord with me because it made sense. And it's not a criticism of my parents, but if, like you say, if they haven't done any growth, then their level of reactivity is coming from a very sort of stunted and immature place.
It's a one-trick pony. Like you're going to get the same. I knew I was going to get the same reaction to my mother, like every time. My mother was a registered nurse. She did a lot of the work. She was working a lot. She made the money for the family. She sort of organized things. She was a very good organizer. But there wasn't a whole lot of like connected, I love yous, touch, that kind of stuff, right? So it was this sort of thing where, my dad was much more kind of playful, loving, affectionate, that kind of stuff. But because he would go crazy every 6 to 18 months, it's like, I can't trust this love and connection, because you are going to go nuts in the next little while, even though it felt great for him to throw a ball, to do the classic, ride a bike, all that kind of stuff too. So there was this sense that, as I got into my teenage years and he got sicker and sicker as he got older, I became his parent. Right. And then so it further sort of skewed my view of what and then there was a lot of resentment involved with like, why do I have to look after you? So in a way with Leandra, with my daughter, I was kind of like, there was part of me unconsciously was like, okay, Ginny, you do the parenting stuff and I'll do the fun stuff. In which case Ginny didn't like that, because I was always the fun parent. Right. And she was the one that had to, kind of crack the whip.
But I think to go back to what you just said too, this idea of, we heard the term parentified child, where the child takes on the role of parenting. Right. And I think there's enough intelligent, sensitive kids that when they see their parent having a big emotional reaction, and they have this awareness, either subconsciously or otherwise, that they have to caretake that parent.
Absolutely.
That's how that starts. So again, the more we can do to learn about our feelings, learn about self-regulation, to really keep in mind that we're supposed to be modeling behavior. We're not supposed to be sort of like winging it, hoping for the best, and then leaving them to clean it up after.
Yeah, I know with my mother, like she's failing, she's in a facility that sort of, she's still mobile and stuff, even though she's busted 2 hips and stuff. I call her Boris the Blade. I don't know if you know this. I think I might have told you the story, from Snatch. There's this character in the movie Snatch, this Guy Ritchie movie called Boris the Blade. And he's impossible to kill. It's not that I want to kill my mother by any means at all, but the Scottish genes. Like she's 91, she's broken 2 hips, and she keeps going, man. Like she keeps going. So I noticed that if she's having a bad day, and this is what I used to do when I was a child with her, is that I would make her laugh. So I think that's where my sense of humor kind of built was in making her laugh, because then I was okay. Like if she was laughing and she was laughing hard, I would have this sense like, oh, okay, I guess she's okay, So, and to this day, I'm aware of it now. So I see when she's having a rough day, and I can see the impulse is so seductive to kind of throw in a couple of jokes in there. And a lot of times I do, but there is this, like, it was so automatic for me to kind of just take control of parenting her in a lot of ways. So, and it didn't really help me mature enough to be able to show that to my daughter. I've been able to do that now as she's older. So she and we work together. She works in the company and that kind of thing. We travel together really well. She says we share the same brain. We both have ADD. We both have this kind of thing. We get along really, really well together. And it is one of those things that it's really flourished into this wonderful relationship that I really didn't have to do a whole lot for as far as parenting goes, except for give her the nurture, because I gave her a ton of nurturance when she was younger. And I've always wondered, if she was a boy, how would I have parented differently? I would have challenged him a lot more than I challenge her. Although I used to challenge her quite a bit, like throw her in the deep end of the pool and I'm there. It's not like I'm sort of, sink or swim, but I'm there for her. I would challenge her for sure. But I think, I would, out of that sort of James Bond idea of parenting, I think it would be a lot harder on a boy than I was on her.
Yeah, I can relate. I mean, I have 2 daughters.
Yes, exactly.
And I was a bit relieved, just in the sense that part of it was that I knew I could be as soft and squishy as I wanted to.
Right. Yeah.
And I wasn't going to like corrupt them in terms of their ability to survive on the playground.
It's a good point.
Yeah,
that's a good point. So what is the challenge for the most guys that come in to see you? Like, is there a frequent flyer kind of challenge that they all come in with?
I think that the overarching challenge is just that lack of familiarity of like, what do I do with all this stuff? Right. Like, because they do default to their partner typically, and they also, but I think there's enough guys out there now that want to have some level of agency in this regard.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think if you can tie it to your own growth and not just have it be about your kids, and I think the humility of like, oh, this is mine, not them, because I think that's the other part, is guys quickly realize there's not much to fix in our kids. It's about looking at our reaction to their behavior. For sure. Right. As long as we set up healthy boundaries and we communicate those effectively, we don't necessarily have to change their behavior that much. We have to reevaluate what we think kids are capable of.
Yeah. And I think just, that self-awareness piece and that building resilience and capacity when things go bad, because our response with testosterone, with some of the, cortisol, the stress hormones, and the neuropeptides and stuff, is to go to like tense. It's just go really tense. That's our first response, is to go to tense. And as soon as you go to tense, you shut off your rational prefrontal cortex and you become an emotional thing. And you're much more likely to do things that you're not proud of in that emotional brain. So things like curiosity, kind of helps us pull back into that. Okay, how am I feeling this? And just practice, just practice over and over and just sort of seeing, okay, how can I do this differently? And also when you do it differently, like really, and Huberman talks about this too, like reward yourself for that. Like really like make that like, I really did a great job with that, and really kind of go over the top with it, because you're really trying to create new behavioral pathways that help you and your child or children.
Yeah. No, I think that reflection part is a really big one. And being the sort of like relationship scientist. Right. To get really sort of curious and analytical about what worked and what didn't, and what would I do the next time, and what could it look like. And the same was, I did a lot of reading when I was younger about visualization in sports, right? Because there's so much research that shows it's so powerful. But if you can actually visualize, like, and it's interesting because when I think of people visualizing the perfect parenting day, I don't want them to visualize like throwing the ball and getting
Right.
ice cream.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
Sure.
actually want that. Partly, I want them to visualize
The freak out.
having conflict
Sure.
and repairing.
Yeah.
Right. And having that show up in their body. Right. Like, what does it feel like when you repair? Right. What does it feel like when they come back to you because they know you're safe?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think repair is the ultimate relational superpower.
I think so too. Yeah. I think it's so important for kids to know. It's like, again, it's not so much what happens to us. It's whether or not there was repair, whether or not there was, I wasn't proud of that behavior. I would like to do it differently. It wasn't your fault. It really, I mean, that allows the nervous system of both people to sort of build and create a new pathway, because I don't think that we get that enough. I think a lot of times once the initial hullabaloo dies down, it's just left. And so many families are like that, like, especially like alcoholic families, that sort of stuff. There's the big blow up, and then there might be an apology, there might not be. And then it just sort of goes into the quiet phase for a while. And then it blows up again. And then it goes in a quiet phase for a while. And it's just like realizing that, okay, I can actually handle the discomfort of my child's discomfort.
Yeah, I think that's a huge one.
Yeah. Because I know I till this day, I have a really hard time with Leander when she's upset, right? And I'm aware of it. And she's, she's an adult now. She has 2 kids of her own. But there is that, and basically it comes back to my mother. Like, it's like I couldn't handle my mother's upset, so I don't handle Leander's upset very well. But I'm a lot better at sort of not trying to fix it so much with her, and just sort of saying, because Leander and I have this thing. It's like, do you want Dr. Dad or do you want listening dad? So sometimes she wants Dr. Dad because she's got some medical thing, but most of the time she wants listening dad. Now, that took me a long time to figure out that listening dad was even a thing, because I was aware that, this is, I want to fix, and being a doctor on top of all that other stuff, it's like, people come in 30 times a day to see me so I can fix stuff. So it was a real paradigm shift for me to go from just, okay, and just to ask her now, like, and, well, it's a joke now between us, right? She'll call me up and we'll talk about like the taxes of the business or whatever. It's like, she's like, all right, I can't get through Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan's the hardest province, I guess, with taxes and stuff. I can't get this, driving me crazy. And it's like, do you want Dr. Dad or do you want listening dad? It's like, I want listening dad. And then we'll laugh about it. And it's just such a connection with her, because then I know. Like, I know what she needs, right? Because so often as men, we're supposed to know, like, we're supposed to have this all in the bag already. And we're supposed to be, leading our wives and, polarity and all this stuff. And which I think, has some relevance to it. But I think this sort of, overemphasis on academics and teaching and learning, especially in parenting, without the behavioral aspect, is really damaging.
Well, and I think, so one of the questions I posed to my daughters recently, and I will pose this to them on a regular basis because I think it speaks to what you're saying, is I asked them the other day, I said, is there anything about you that I'm not getting? Is there something about you would like me to understand
That's
better?
A great question.
Right? And I think that's a good question because, 1, it shows curiosity, and 2, it shows humility, because it's like, hey, there's probably something I'm missing here, and I'm okay to know that.
Right.
Because I want to understand what you can tell me about yourself. Right. And, my daughter's, I asked my 9-year-old and she looked at me sort of quizzically. So I knew it didn't quite land. And so I said, is there anything you want me to do more or less of?
Yeah.
And her response as a 9-year-old was more candy.
Yeah, for sure.
But the point is, I chose a time where I was regulated.
Yeah.
She was regulated. And I'm starting to build that pathway of, I'm someone who really wants to know what your needs are.
Right.
And the easiest way for you to get them met is for you to tell me. Right?
Yeah.
And I think especially for young girls, them expressing their needs and expressing preferences or boundaries is a life skill. It's
totally.
A crucial life skill.
Totally. Yeah, because they're taught, a lot of young females are taught, keep quiet, do your work, do the housework, whatever it is, keep your man happy. Whatever. I mean, maybe this is a sort of 50s paradigm, but I think there's some sort of evolutionary thing that gets put into girls where they don't share that stuff.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be the the nurturer, right? They're not supposed to be the one who provide or who asks for help themselves.
Yeah.
But that question, is there anything about you I'm not getting? I think that's such a great question to ask, even when you're both doing well, right? So it's like you're both doing well. So, you're at the park or whatever. It's like, hey, I know we're having fun these days, but is there anything these days that, you think that I'm not getting about you? And I think most of the kids will just go, no, I think it's great.
Yeah.
But if there is something that's kind of beneath the surface, you give them an opportunity to bring it up when you're both open, and see. And I talk a lot about that with alarm in your body. It's like, it's so important to work on the alarm in your body when you're feeling good.
That's
like
right.
If you just wait until you're in extremis, when you're, dysregulated, and then it's like, okay, well, now take deep breaths, do a physiological sigh. Am I safe in this moment? Put my hand over the alarm, feel it. Yeah. You'll get, and I think I talked about this before. It's like you get sort of one repair point from that. But if you do it when you're feeling good, like if you're going somewhere, you're going to meet a friend for dinner, you're looking having a good time, like bring the alarm child with you. It's like, hey, this is going to be really fun. We haven't seen this person for ages. It's going to be really fun. Like, let's do this. And sort of that, the more you connect within it, there's a part of our brain, I'm going to go a little nerdy, called the insular cortex, and it's right in the center of our brain. And it's kind of matches the mind to the body and the body to the mind. And with PTSD and anxiety, there's some disruption in that insular cortex because it gives you this framework on your body, is kind of what the insula does. And it also, I think, holds body memories, like old painful body memories. And I think it holds them in such a way that it's almost like lock and key. So when we get exposed to the same thing, like when I get exposed to someone who demands too much from me, which I perceived my mother did and my father did, it goes right into that same old thing, and I lose my perspective on that. So if I kind of go, okay, I know this is coming, like I know there's this sense that I'm being taken advantage of, can I slow it down? Can I sit with it? And can I just feel like I'm not taking advantage of myself?
Yeah.
Just being connected and just showing our kids how to have that sense of introspection. Now at 9, it's going to be difficult, but your older girl's what, 12 now?
Yeah,
11, yeah.
12.
Yeah. So it's like, that's starting to get to the age where, they're starting to get a little more sense of themselves. And, you have a chance to build this sense in them, this body sense in them at a very young age, which I think, body awareness is so key to emotional regulation. So yeah, we're getting a little off topic with the guys that you think, but creating that awareness in the guys is so important, because then we can because we can't show them that unless we have it ourselves.
Yeah, I think you just sort of summed it up perfectly. It's like, this isn't about coming in and sort of figuring out our kids and what we need our kids to do differently or what we fix in our kids. It's like, using ourself as the reference point. Because then we create that safety within ourselves, which means we create safety for our kids.
Yeah. And then, then you get a chance to build that relationship. That relationship can build and thrive. And as you go into, your adulthood and the child's adulthood, you build this framework, which, like I enjoy being with Leandra so much. And every 6 weeks we go to this little spa place and has hot and cold dips, and we go for dinner first and we talk about the business, we talk about stuff. And I made a joke to her last time. It's like, it's about a 4-hour thing, because we go for dinner first, then we go to the spa for 3 hours. And I think she talked about herself 99.9% of that.
Yeah.
But just prattling away, and I'm fine with it. Like, I'm just so pleased that she could just let this stuff out, having 2 kids and having the stress of that and that kind of thing. And just being able to understand that, yeah, all this stuff it's just part of it. And just the interpersonal relationships we have with other people is what makes suffering tolerable.
Yeah.
And I see so many people with anxiety, bringing you back to the anxiety, that don't have that social engagement system sort of gene or whatever built in, like eye contact, tone of voice, positive voice, body language, facial expression. This stuff, when we get anxious, we move away from eye contact. We move away from this connection. And it's this double whammy that we get because we resist what we need the most. And I think men are much more likely to kind of withdraw into that sort of space because we're trained to do that. And then it makes being a father really difficult if you can't feel yourself.
Yeah. And then there's, I think the other part too that often comes up is that if we don't know how to be with our feelings, then we feel shame for having them.
Right.
Right. So I think if we can normalize the fact that yes, men have feelings too, and that by feeling our feelings, we don't become women. And not that there's anything wrong with women.
Good one. I like
Right.
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it's like a guy who is connected to his feelings
Right.
is a powerful guy.
Mhm.
And he's not powerful over.
Right.
He's powerful within.
Right.
Right. And I don't know if have you read Connor Beaton's book?
Yeah.
Beaton's work?
Yeah.
So he talks about emotional sovereignty.
For sure.
And
Yeah.
I think that's such a great
It's
word.
a great term. Yeah.
It's a great term because it does speak to the idea that we are aware of our feelings, but we have sovereignty over them.
Mm-hmm.
And not in a repressive way, but in an informative way.
Right. I wonder why, male feelings devolve, like our knee jerk is to go to shame.
Again, I think it's because we aren't taught how to be with them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like if we're always sort of said, go over there and be angry by yourself, or go to your room
Right.
and come back when you feel like you're ready to join us, which is what a lot of us heard.
Right.
Then we don't have someone provide that containment of like, yeah, this is a big feeling.
Right.
And where do you feel this in your body? And what does it feel like? And what is the story you want to tell? And all those things from somatic experiencing, that whole SIBAM list, right?
Mm-hmm.
With sensation and image and behavior and affect and meaning.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that familiarity. So we feel overwhelmed. And when I did my last SE training, we talked about shame causing people to go into dorsal ventral, or dorsal vagal, but then dorsal vagal can cause people to go into shame.
Oh, for sure.
It's a, sort of loop that we get stuck in.
You don't have any agency, like you're just flat.
Yeah.
So any negative, emotion or feeling or rationalization has instant credibility when you don't have the energy to refute it.
Yeah.
So, and I think too, our feelings are separating when we're younger. And it's a negative feeling. Like it's a painful feeling when you feel separate from other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that default into shame is so much easier when you feel that. So yeah, there's my dog in the background. So how do people find you? How do they find your course?
So my website is lifelovehabits.com.
Okay. And
the course is called the Fatherhood Compass. To date, I've only been teaching it in person, but as of next year, I'll be putting it online.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I know when we have our coffees and our conversations, I always benefit from it too. So I would strongly encourage, because there's so much resistance for men. Like they know they're going to have to go in and feel their feelings. And there's so much resistance there. Is there anything you can kind of like reassure, like you're not going in holding hands, singing Kumbaya first day. It's basically, you're just like, hey, you're here, you want to be a better parent. You feel that there's something missing.
Mm-hmm.
And like, maybe in the first little while, we do look at it as an analytical situation, because it does have to be solved in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of slowly move into kind of like the feeling state. And I think that's why a lot of men resist this kind of work and not just parenting work, like just emotional work in general, because it's hard. When if you're not, if you have a company curling match and you never curled before, it's like you're not going to want it. But if you have a softball match and you're a good softball player, you're going to want to play that game. But if you don't, it's when you're uncomfortable with that particular thing. And I guess it's just making it more comfortable and accessible, and just to try it. Like, do they have is there a chance that when you go in, you find the first 2 weeks isn't quite right? It's like, this isn't for me, or is it basically, I guess they could do that if they wanted to.
What I've loved seeing is that the first date, it's like, I remember one of the guys who came, he said when he came in the first day, he looked at the other guys and said, "What are you in for?" Right?
Yeah.
But once you realize that there's this shared experience of this is hard and we can learn how to do this.
Right.
That becomes empowering.
Yeah.
And that gives these guys the confidence. And by week 2 or 3, they're usually excited to come and share what they've noticed.
Oh, I'm sure.
Themselves and their kids, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there is this sense in men and in humans in general, just to learn, because I think as men, we're supposed to like know it all already. Like, we know we don't, but there is this kind of sense that we know it already. And then learning is such a valuable, and it just inflates. It's like sex, learning, food. Like that, I think, are the 3 things that human beings crave the most. I mean, relationships, of course, but sex, learning, and food.
Yeah.
So when you learn something and you're actually engaged in it, and it's empowering, and especially if you're feeling like you're disempowered in that field, which if you're spending 2 hours a day with your young kids, it's going to be difficult to feel empowered.
Yeah, but I think the other part of that too is that once you get familiar with this landscape, and then you notice that your kids having a freak out doesn't affect you the same way.
Yeah.
You don't go into this place of panic or needing to fix. You can just go like, what's going on?
Right.
That feels really sort of like diffusing in a way.
Yeah. Is there anything about you that I'm not getting?
Yeah.
And on that note, thanks for being here, Ian.
Thanks, man. Always good to talk.